Welcome to Washington in Focus, your source for the week's top stories in the state of Washington. I'm Cole Lauterbach, managing editor for the Center Square Newswire service. This week, we'll be discussing a county sheriff seeing fewer police chases after a citizen initiative allowed police to pursue suspects. Governor Inslee stressing that a $200 check using carbon auction funds is not a bribe to get voters to approve its repeal this November. County consternation about whether their police force should be featured on the show Cops, and Spokane County joining the ranks of others piling on the state for handing off jailed juveniles. That's ahead on Washington in Focus. I'm Cole Lauterbach.
Some people would call him a loser. He ran for state office. He was beaten. He started a business. He failed. He ran for Congress. He lost. He was nominated for vice president. He lost again. But he knew only those who never tried are the real losers. And Abraham Lincoln was no loser. Persistence. Pass it on. From the Foundation for a Better Life at values.com.
Welcome back to Washington in Focus. I'm Cole Lauterbach. Now, let's jump into the headlines. The argument behind banning police chases in 2021 was that they caused more harm than help in apprehending criminals. Now that Washingtonians have forced lawmakers to repeal the law, Capitol correspondent Carlene Johnson spoke to one county that is seeing another side effect. Carlene?
Yeah, Cole, the Thurston County Sheriff's Office, right on June 6th, the first day that Initiative 2113 took effect in state law, they were right on top of it. They said, as of this day, June 6th, our first opportunity to sort of loosen restrictions on policing, they did it. And they have been consistently posting to Facebook videos or sometimes, still images with a description of high-speed chases and the result of the reason for some of those and then the result. And they're catching some bad guys.
Now, explain the details of just exactly what was banned initially in 2021, or I guess in 2022 when it took effect, and then what was undone by the ballot initiative.
So House Bill 1054 was passed and signed into law in 2021. You recall that was still kind of right in the middle of the whole defund police movement that kind of resulted from, Black Lives Matter protests, the George Floyd murder, all of that. But what it did was severely restrict police officers' ability to chase. It said, unless you have not reasonable suspicion that someone has done something wrong, but probable cause that, to arrest a person in a vehicle for committing a specific violent crime, sex offense, or DUI. So it basically said, only if you know this guy is, truly a bad guy, committed an offense that you're certain you can follow through on, you better not give chase. And what it did, as anybody in the state of Washington knows, is it, gave the bad guys the upper hand because police stopped pursuing. Even if they saw somebody running out the front of a 7-Eleven store and they'd gotten a call from the manager saying, this guy just stole stuff and he's got a gun or whatever, the guy jumps in the car and takes off. 9 times out of 10, police did not chase that guy, and the bad guy knew they wouldn't get chased.
Exactly. And that's that to my next point is fleeing suspects got smart to the ban. I mean, we had seen some famous videos about, go back off. You can't chase me, right?
Yeah, they knew that. They knew they had the upper hand, and it led to huge spike in crime statistics in the state of Washington. I mean, find me somebody in the state right now who either hasn't had their car stolen, probably a Kia, or some other, or their neighbor had a car stolen. In the state of Washington in the last few years, we all know somebody who went through that. And that's because even if police spotted a known stolen vehicle, they could not pursue under the restrictions until the initiative took effect on June 6th.
Right. 1/5 of our Washington team has had their car stolen in the time of the police chase ban.
Right.
Interesting factoid.
No. I'm sorry to interrupt you, Cole, but then all the other related crimes, right? Because we gave the bad guys the upper hand, knowing they could steal the cars and get away with them at the same time that Washington state basically decriminalized hardcore drugs. And so you compounded that, and we have had astronomical spikes in crime, from robbery to burglary to, and then the ripple effect of all that and what it's done to people just having a total lack of trust for, and community safety. It's going to take a while to turn this thing around. Yeah. And to that point, the violent crime is what spiked during that time, even though you just recently reported it did go down a little bit. Now, not every police agency, Carlene, immediately loosened restrictions on, it was June 6th when the law took effect. In fact, the state's largest county only made changes as of just this last Thursday, correct? Yeah, just on Thursday, King County Sheriff's Department finally approved and made changes that, take effect as of August 1. Now, keep in mind that the initiative allowed all of these law enforcement agencies to come up with their own rules. So you have some more liberal leaning law enforcement agencies, King County Sheriff's Department being one of them. But they're the largest in the state, and they contract with 6 other surrounding cities. So you've had all these cities that up until August 1 were going, hey, wait a minute, everybody else around us is able to pursue again. Why aren't we doing it? Finally, they did it. But their pursuit policy, which again, as you mentioned, took effect on the 1st, came after the changes, but they still have some really strict limitations. They can pursue now for dangerous felonies, DUI, burglary, but they do not have near the lessening of restrictions, I would say, as some of the other agencies like Thurston County. So, it's kind of a piecemeal thing. It's going to be interesting in the weeks and months to come to see how that works, especially when a bad guy being pursued crosses over from one county to the next, right? Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah. Now, the sheriff you spoke to, and it was Thurston County, he had some interesting data to share with you that, showed that they were pursuing more because, well, they could, but there was an interesting side effect, right? Yeah, he said there are in fact more pursuits that had happened, and they took it was like a 10-day period that was, basically from the middle of July towards the end of the month. And they did pursue a number of vehicles. You got these guys on a bunch of high-speed motorcycles. They had several of them that fled. Thankfully, nobody was seriously hurt in the crashes. And in one case, they did pursue, because I said, well, you're not pursuing for equipment violations, are you? And he said, well, actually, if it's 2 a.m. and there's an equipment violation, there's nothing else going on, I've got officers out there, we can now pursue. They ended up catching 2 drug dealers in a car after these guys crashed into a tree. One of them had 9 warrants out for very serious drug crimes. So even though it was a broken taillight or whatever else the equipment violation was, they ended up catching some really bad guys and getting them off the street because they can now pursue. Yeah. The one video that they posted online about that showed the police camera footage about one of the guys that they chased and caught was pretty, that guy. Unbelievable. Yeah. And the end of it, I loved it. With the end of it, the cop's body cam shows the bad guy who crashed and was not seriously hurt. He's like, oh, I just got this bike for my birthday. And the cop's like, well, it's mine now. So kind of a message to the bad guys that, we've got the law on our side now. Sorry. Well, and he said, I thought you guys couldn't chase me. And he said, well, that law changed, bud. But sorry. Whoops. Oh, man. Thank you, Carlene. Good story. Appreciate it. Moving on, one of Washington Governor Jay Inslee's signature accomplishments is the state's Climate Commitment Act, which created a carbon credit auction that charges carbon emitters for allowances in a trading market of sorts, like other states and Canadian provinces. With the coming ballot initiative to repeal it in November, the state has chosen to give out checks to low-income households using a small portion of the more than $2 billion the state has brought in from the auctions. Investigative reporter TJ Martinell covered one of Inslee's latest news conferences where he responded to some critiques that the checks, from what Republicans and others who oppose it say, amount to a bribe. What did he say, TJ?
Well, he called the initiative disingenuous or deceptive, dangerous, and defective. And he insisted that it wasn't a bribe.
Now, how much of the $2 billion is going out to these low and lower middle class households, and who are getting them?
Well, we're looking at potentially $150 million being spent on this rebate program, and it's going to be around $750 1,000 households and an estimated 1.5 million state residents. So a significant percentage of the state population will receive the household will receive a $200 rebate or credit on their energy bill.
Okay. And now what we've reported on in the past, and probably the thing that got the most headlines, is the effect on gas prices that the carbon auctions are costing residents. How does this measure up for the people that do qualify and are getting these $200 rebate checks? Is it even a fraction of the estimated cost at this point?
Well, that's the big question. It's like reminds me of that Evan Costello routine where he says, "Hey, did you get 2 10s for a 5?" Where you have gas prices that are going up because of the CCA, and even Puget Sound Energy, the state's largest utility, in a request to raise their rates, they admitted that the CCA was contributing to higher energy rates, and they wanted it actually to be included in the utility bill that customers could view, and that was opposed by the state attorney general's office that was acting as legal counsel on behalf of the public. So that's the big question: is what they're getting $200 back due to the CCA, but how much money have they had to spend in increased gas prices and energy prices?
Yeah. And you had brought this up when we were working on this story, TJ, is in this news conference and subsequent ones, really. He didn't mention this. The point of the carbon auction is to discourage the use of carbon-based energy sources.
Yes, that's been an interesting pivot on the part of Inslee. At numerous press conferences, he has not even mentioned, if at all, carbon reduction. He's been focusing on air pollution reduction and how it's going to make the air cleaner and it's going to, prevent all these diseases or health problems. Not really mentioning, which is the stated purpose of it. I mean, if you go to the Department of Ecology's website for the CCA, it openly talks about the purpose of this program is to reduce carbon emissions. So it's interesting that he's pivoting to say that it's going to have these more tangible benefits than saying, well, we reduce carbon, because the question is, well, how significant is that? But now he's trying to put it, it seems like he's trying to put it into terms that people are able to relate to their own lives, because saying you're reducing carbon is one thing. Saying, hey, we're going to make the air cleaner so your kid doesn't have asthma, which is literally what he said at the press conference, is, kids will be able to actually breathe and focus on homework and not on being able to breathe.
And I mean, I suppose it's just better marketing, I guess, because when you talk about carbon use, that is kind of an abstract to the everyday potential likely voter. But we will see if this message resonates, and we'll moving forward, I guess, in terms of polling and such, to see once these $200 rebates hit bank accounts, to see if it changes the opinion of what at this point has been a fairly controversial program in the state of Washington that only exists in a handful of other places, California and Vancouver. Correct? They're looking to link with those as well for what they say is price stability. Thank you, TJ. Good story. Pierce County Sheriff's Office has been invited to join the Men and Women of Law Enforcement featured on the long-running show Cops. The series is no stranger to Washington, having been featured in different police forces there over the years. But county officials aren't completely ready for their time in the spotlight. Seattle reporter Spencer Pauly had this story. Spencer, what's the main argument for having producers ride along with officers that Cops has used to get their shows on the air for years?
Yeah, the main argument here is that Cops can help the Pierce County Sheriff's Department's recruitment efforts. At the end of 2023, there are 771 employees related to public safety within the county. The Sheriff Department specifically has set its budget for 402 full-time employees this year. To give you better context, neighboring King County, which is the largest county in Washington state, had 1,125 positions in its own Sheriff's Department. So huge drop there. And it looks like Pierce County Sheriff's Department's looking to recruit more people. And by having the show Cops, you can have viewers get the opportunity to see perhaps what a thrilling job it can be, feel like you're doing a good deed, a good public service for your area. And that's kind of the look at here.
Yeah, to feel like they're kind of making a difference, in the community, which makes sense. Now, when this was originally brought before Pierce County's officials, it seemed as though not everybody was too on board with this in the context of a recruitment effort. What were the apprehensions of county officials for their sheriff's police, their deputies being featured on the program?
Yeah, well, I reached out to the Pierce County Council Chair Ryan Mello for his take on this, and he told me that the show takes isolated incidents and creates a more negative perception that violent crime across all the county, and that it kind of hinders the progress that the county is working to improve crime rates because they are increasing. And he looked at other things that the county is doing, whether it's, increasing pay for deputies as a better solution rather than letting a show kind of take what footage they want and make a story out of it. And that's what he argued.
I I understand that. And it feels like he has a solid grasp on reality TV, where producers are often behind the scenes kind of poking and prodding and trying to manipulate the situation to create artificial drama. But I have watched Cops for years.
Those aren't actors. Those aren't actors.
No, they're absolutely not actors. And a lot of reality shows don't have actors, or I guess maybe they do or they don't. But Cops is a bit different in the way that not every show and not every situation where they ride along with multiple officers is going to be police chase to robbery response to drug overdoses to at the same time, then all of a sudden, booking the bad guy. It's not always the Wild West cops and robbers. Oftentimes with the half of the shows on Cops, you find that these officers are going to domestic disputes and they're being portrayed as, the peacekeepers, the mediators in what could have otherwise become one of those, potentially deadly situations.
Right.
I wonder if there's a disconnect there.
I wonder too, but I will say, going to your point, Cole, about what the show does and showing how they stand in between conflicts and kind of are peacemakers, perhaps. Well, that coincides with what Councilmember Amy Kruger told me as well. She said that Cops showcases what deputies' normal routine looks like, and that it's just very informative. And that when they talk to people, you can see how they interact with people. It's not always so aggressive. Like you said, you're not seeing police chases and everything like that. But what Kruger says is that what the show is being informative, it presents viewers the context to help form their own opinions on how to address crime. And it kind of involves the community in that regard. When you see something like that, it can help viewers and, Pierce County residents become more passionate about how do we solve crime. When you see this, when you see someone who's distressed that the deputy is working with and trying to help come to a resolution. So like you said there.
Yeah. And I remember one Cops from years and years ago. There was one shot in, it was a suburb of Philadelphia. It was like King of Prussia or something like that, where one of the officers got a noise complaint, and it ended up being kids playing basketball at like 9:00 at night. And so instead of going out there and, dispersing the crowd, unlawful gathering, he played for half an hour with the kids. And it was just, he said, all right, guys, listen, officially city ordinance says that it's after 9:00. You do have to clear out now, but just, try and keep the yelling to a minimum, no swearing out of respect for the neighbors. And I feel like that's a good representation of the more norm of what law enforcement will do on an everyday basis, because they're members of the community as well. Yeah. And one point that I did see that it resonated with me was concern for the suspects in the context of a very, very heavy drug presence now as compared to what we'd seen years before, in the Cops' heyday.
Yeah, but one thing you have to consider is that for LATV, those people have to approve to have their faces shown. So,
that's a good point.
So when their faces is blurred out, that's because they did not give consent to that. So when you see their faces revealed, they were giving consent to this. So when you see that, you have to keep that in mind. But that is true that when you see people who are, addicted to drugs or going through a drug overdose, it's kind of difficult to watch, and it can kind of harm that person when they appear on TV. But at the same time, that is just something that goes along with it. And so if you see their face on there, they gave permission.
Yeah, I was a producer at a cable sports network years and years ago, and I was one of my jobs was trying to convince people that were on location for shows, please let us show your face. You would be shocked. It's like 1 out of 20 is actually okay with it. The editors hated it because they had to blur so many faces out just because of that, the legalities behind it. Thank you, Spencer. Good story. When a juvenile goes to jail, they're not held with adults, rather at an age-appropriate detention facility. These facilities, commonly run by states and counties, have seen capacity issues nationwide, with some states worse than others. In Washington, the state has told counties that it can't hold any more young inmates and has started handing the responsibility off to counties. Eastern Washington reporter Tim Klauser has the latest on the county's legal effort to fight back. Tim?
Yeah, Cole, the Washington State Department of Children, Youth, and Families announced earlier this month that it was going to suspend new intakes for the state's 2 juvenile rehabilitation facilities. Now, these 2 locations are where juvenile offenders go when they're sentenced to 30 days or more. Typically, anything less than that 30-day threshold, they would go to a county or more local facility. However, with them suspending the intakes, they're relying on the counties to now take all these extra inmates. And a lot of counties don't have space to hold these juveniles as is, so it's only exacerbating the issues in those areas. For example, Spokane has 2 facilities of their own, and combined they have less than 100 cells or beds. Meanwhile, DCYF's Green Hill School, which is one of the ones they're suspending intake at, went from 150 juveniles in January to 240 in June, which put them 30% over capacity. And this is all the while, all these local facilities, for the most part, are red lighted, so they can't take any more. So in response, all of Washington's 39 counties have come together, and yesterday they formally filed a lawsuit on behalf of the Washington State Association of Counties against DCYF.
Yeah. And now the big complaint is that, well, at least we saw with Spokane, is that they were given no notice, right?
Yeah, and that wasn't unique to Spokane. Every county, there is no notice as far as what WASAC is saying. And the Superior Court Judges Association also came out and said this. They sent a letter to DCYF over this and said they didn't take the time to tell the counties or the judges, and that they actually saw this coming, that it was foreseeable and preventable. It wasn't an overnight problem. They most notably noted that one of the driving factors in this is the fact that since 2018, Washington State has allowed juveniles up to the age of 25 to stay in their facilities, even when they're faced with adult level sentences. So they can't be transferred to a Department of Corrections prison until they turn 25 years old.
Now, and because of this, the overflows, the state has tried to send some of these people, men and women, kids who have been tried and convicted as adults to the juvenile detention, or to the non-juvenile detention facilities, the traditional prisons, and that backfired, right?
Yeah, so after announcing that intake freeze at the beginning of this month, DCYF tried to free up some of the space at the Green Hill School by sending some of its older inmates to DOC prison. That included 43 inmates that were in between the ages of 21 to 25. However, in doing so, DCYF violated state law by transferring them without having a transfer hearing while they were still under the age of 25. Now, all these individuals got together with their attorneys, and they filed suit against DCYF for this. And a Thurston County Superior Court reversed the transfer and held that DCYF has to continue holding them until those transfer hearings take place. Now, the director of DCYF came out and said this is only going to put the campus and its staff at more risk.
Right. Yeah, because more inmates than than the wardens, than the officers can handle. It becomes an immediate risk because, there becomes issues of being overwhelmed. Now, what's next in this lawsuit, Tim?
Yeah, so the suit was officially filed yesterday after they were gathering support from all the counties the past week or two. And they put out a statement saying, the basis of this is that DCYF failed to plan and budget to accommodate the anticipated growth. And they even chose to close another facility 2 years ago, which held an additional 150 people. They're arguing that the director was false in saying that the intake freeze wouldn't result in people being released because the counties don't have space to house them as is. So the WASAC director told me this morning that they should hear back from the court in the next few weeks. They filed for a declaratory injunctive relief, which is different than a tort claim or your sort of run-of-the-mill lawsuit. And the courts are able to turn through this much faster. So he basically said if the court sides with WASAC in Washington's 39 counties, it would probably order DCYF to fulfill its statutory requirements of housing those inmates and likely order the state to expand its capacity by renovating current facilities or opening new ones. Though he said it could lead to DCYF having to pay out some money to the counties, but he said that's not for sure.
All right. Well, we will see. Thank you, Tim. And a big thank you to our journalists for sharing their stories today. Stay up to date with these and more at thecentersquare.com. I'm Cole Lauterbach. And until next time, this has been Washington in Focus.